Welcome to Deeper in the Word. I'm Dr. Joshua Houston. It's my pleasure to invite you to journey beyond the surface into the context, language, theology, and life of faith shaped by God's Word. Each episode will walk through biblical text with careful attention to what God has spoken and how it forms us today. So take a breath, open your Bible, and let's go deeper in the Word together.
Luke chapter 15, we're ready for verse 25. Last week, we saw the younger brother in the parable of the Prodigal Son. The younger brother, this is the one who came to his father and said, "You're as good as dead to me, give me my inheritance." And we recall last week we said that the father gave the inheritance to both sons. The text says he gave it to them, plural. One son stays with the father. He continues to work in the household. This would be the older son. The younger son, on the other hand, goes to a Gentile country. How do we know it's a Gentile country? A couple of ways. Number one, it's a far-off country. That's number one. And number two, he gets a job feeding the pigs. And no self-respecting Jewish man would have ever gotten a job being around pigs. They wouldn't have kept pigs. Pigs were sort of the ultimate symbol of being unclean. And so the famine ensues in that land. This young man has nothing. He's hit rock bottom. He wishes that he could just eat what the pigs ate, which we talked about that from sort of a philosophical and psychological sense last week, that sometimes when we hit rock bottom, rather than trying to climb our way back up, we just want to fill ourselves with the empty things that the unclean of the world would have us have. And that's so true, right? When we hit rock bottom, we hardly ever look up. We look around, and that's what this young man's doing. But the text says that when he came to himself, or when he came to his senses, that he said, "Let me just go back home and become one of my father's hired servants." So he does, and as he approaches home, the father sees him from a long way off, runs out to meet him with open arms. This is very unusual in the ancient Jewish world. Older men, and the older that you were, the less you ran, right? You walked with decorum. So here the father forgets the social constructs of the world. He runs out to the son, embraces him, kisses him, and brings three things to put on him. And those three things are very, very important for this story. He brings the robe, which this young man has been having a job feeding the pigs, and so presumably he smelt bad and was dirty, but he brings the clean robe and puts on him. He brings the signet ring. Only a member of the family could wear a signet ring because that had your name or your crest or something along those lines on the ring. And so it's a symbol of him being brought back into the family. And then shoes are number three. The young man said, "Let me be one of your hired servants," one of your household slaves, we might say. A household slave in the first century did not wear shoes. It was a sign of their servitude. And the father brings shoes and says, put sandals on his feet. And so all of these have their symbolism, first of all, in being brought back into the family. Not just brought into the household, but brought back into the family. And we looked last week at how those symbols correspond with baptism, that putting on the new robe, that we are clothed in Christ, Galatians 3:27, that the ring, we are made sons of God, 1 John tells us. And then the shoes, we are servants of Christ, we are slaves of Christ, Romans chapter 6, but we have a privileged position in the home. And so that's a very beautiful thing, and this story is a very beautiful story. And when we get to verse 24, we get those beautiful words from the father, "For this my son was dead and is alive again." I think we need to realize that for the characters in the story, the father presumed his son was dead. He had been gone for some time. He hadn't come back. And so you presume your son's dead, but he's alive. He was lost and is found. They didn't know where he had gone. They didn't know what he was doing. And they began to celebrate. So that last phrase, that last clause in verse 24, "and they began to celebrate," is the crux or the pinnacle on which the remainder of the parable rests. We've seen two parables already in chapter 15 before this. And they follow the same structure as what the first part of this parable follows. You have something that's lost, you have something that's found, and you have a celebration. Right? We had the lost sheep, the lost coin, now the lost son. But which of the sons in this parable is actually lost? Well, obviously the younger brother was lost. I mean, he went out, he was spiritually lost. He went out to the far country, he was with the pigs, he lived a life of debauchery. We understand that. But who are these parables for? The parables are not for the sinners and the tax collectors who are sitting there listening to this. The parables are for the Pharisees who had accused Jesus of eating with the tax collectors and sinners and thereby showing table fellowship. And in the first century, that was a way to show approval. Right? So now we get to the older brother. It is very clear that the older brother in this parable represents the Pharisees. The bad attitude towards the ones who were found, towards the ones who came back. So let's read verse 25, and we'll just go ahead and read to the end of the chapter and then go back and talk about this. It says, "Now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." Verse 32, a reiteration of what the Father says in verse 24. So in verse 25, if we begin and kind of break this down verse by verse, verse 25 tells us that the older son was where? He was in the field. Where should he have been? This is not a trick question. In the field. Right. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. We often read the account of the Gospels and we see these characters of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and we have a view of the Pharisees in particular because of what Jesus says about them in Matthew 23. The woe to you, right? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. You're like a dirty dish that is clean on the outside, filthy on the inside. You're like whitewashed tombs. You're beautiful on the outside, but inside you're full of dead men's bones. And we make that a blanket statement for all Pharisees of all time, especially during the life and ministry of Jesus. But I can name at least 2 Pharisees who were really good Pharisees, and we're thankful that they were good Pharisees because we read about them in the New Testament. One of them is the Apostle Paul. Before Paul came to know the Lord, before that Acts chapter 9 vision of Jesus and his, I hate to use the word conversion because that deals with like coming out of paganism to Christianity. What will we say? But before his realization of Jesus as a Messiah, that's a better way to look at it. Paul says that I was a Hebrew of Hebrews, a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was trained by Gamaliel. That's, okay, I said 2, let's say 3. Trained by Gamaliel. Gamaliel we read about in the book of Acts. Gamaliel is a great Pharisee. Gamaliel sits on the Sanhedrin, which was typically a Sadducee council. But they reserved a couple of spots for Pharisees so as to seem fair. And Gamaliel was one of them. And you remember when Peter and John are arrested in the book of Acts and brought before the Sanhedrin, it is Gamaliel who says, hey, if these things are not of God, God will stop it. If they are of God, there's nothing we can do to stop it. Right? It's a great statement from Gamaliel. So we have Paul, we have Gamaliel, and then the third is Nicodemus. Nicodemus is a Pharisee, comes to Jesus by night. doesn't want his other Pharisee friends to see him, or makes the claim, makes the confession that Jesus is the Messiah. That we know that you're from God, that you couldn't do these things if you weren't from God. Which is very interesting. In John 3, Nicodemus never asked a question, not to begin the conversation at least. Jesus says, unless man be born of water and spirit, he can't inherit the kingdom of God. And Nicodemus asks, how can this be? How can a man enter his mother's womb a second time and be born? And Jesus clarifies, asking Nicodemus to have some mental gymnastics. So there's 3 Pharisees that are spoken of positively in the Bible. I mentioned this last week, and I know we've all slept since then, but in Luke's gospel, the Pharisees are relatively neutral, meaning you have good Pharisees and you have bad Pharisees. And that's important. Okay? It's important because verse 25 says the older son was in the field. That's exactly where he was supposed to be. He was working in his father's household. Right? He was doing what he was supposed to do. Jesus does not condemn the Pharisees for what they do. He condemns them for the degree with which they do it. So you can see in Matthew chapter 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, the first 18 verses of that give us the triad of Jewish piety. Okay, so the 3 things that make a good Jew a Jew. Jesus says, when you give, don't be like the hypocrites. He never says the word Pharisee there. That's important. But he says, don't be like the hypocrites. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. And when you fast, don't be like the hypocrites. Well, we know that the Pharisees were hypocritical in their giving because they tithed even the mint leaves and their seasonings that they used. Okay? And so they wanted to be the best Jew, the Jew to the nth degree. Giving is not a bad thing. Jesus does not ridicule them for giving. He ridicules them for the way that they give, the hypocritical way that they give. The same is true with prayer. Prayer is a beautiful thing. Thank God we have prayer. But Jesus ridicules the hypocrites for the way that they pray. Fasting. Fasting is not something that is, I think it's becoming more practiced in Christian circles, which is a good thing. It should be. It's assumed that Christians will fast. Now, we do have extra biblical record that the Pharisees would put on makeup whenever they fasted to make them look like they had fasted longer than they actually had. And so that's very hypocritical. Now, Jesus doesn't condemn the fasting. He condemns the way that they're fasting. Right? Even in that same Sermon on the Mount, Jesus will say that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. So that's a very high honor, right? The scribes and Pharisees are righteous. So, the older son is exactly where he's supposed to be. He's doing everything he's supposed to do. And yet he's upset. So he comes near the house and he heard music and dancing. Music and dancing is used in Jewish circles to celebrate, right? This is what David does whenever the Ark of the Covenant comes into Jerusalem. There's music and David dances before the Ark. And so this is an outward sign of great celebration. Now verse 26 says he calls one of the servants and asks what these things meant. Why does he call a servant? I guess the general answer is we don't know. Why not just go to the Father? And maybe it's because, like the rest of us, we like to talk about people rather than to people. I'll say that again so you tweet it right. We like to talk about people rather than to people. You know, the Bible is abundantly clear that if you have a problem with somebody, you are supposed to go to them and tell them you have a problem with them. But we don't do that. We just fuss and complain behind everybody else's back. And all that does is take the shovel and dig our hole a little bit deeper. Well, this older brother goes to the servant And he asked about these things, and here's what the servant says, verse 27. Your brother has come, your father has killed the fatted calf because he received him back safe and sound. Now, verse 28 says that he was angry and refused to go in. He wasn't going to go into the party. He was upset at this. And the father came out, and notice what happens in verse 28. The father came out and entreated him. Does anyone's Bible say something different than entreated him? I'm sorry? He what? Pleaded with him. Okay, that's a good one. What does the father want from this older son? Yeah. He wants him to be glad. He wants him to come in and join the celebration. He doesn't want him to be closed off. Right? Now, I mentioned this last week, and we're going to run with it this week because we ran out of time. The father kills the fatted calf for the younger son. Last week we mentioned that to get a fatted calf would require a couple of things. First of all, it would require a grain-fed diet for the calf, which means, especially in the ancient world, you're not going to go down to Co-op or Tractor Supply and get all stock feed and just pour it in the trough. Right? You have to get that grain from somewhere if you can't provide it yourself. And if you provide it yourself, you have to have land and laborers to grow and harvest that grain and prepare it for your animals. So if you have a grass-fed diet, go to Walmart and look, or go to Publix, whichever one you shop at, and look at the meat. Look at a grass-fed steak and a grain-fed steak. The grass-fed steak will have fat that is yellow. Grain-fed will have fat that is white. Grass-fed will have virtually no marbling. It'll be very lean. Grain-fed will have a lot of marbling. Now, that is important because if you were to offer a cow or a bull as a sacrifice, what is it that goes on the altar? It's not the meat, not for sin offering. It's the entrails, right? It's the guts. More than that, it is the fat that is around the organs. So, all that, let's just go back to the Old Testament and see what it says. I heard a quote today, and it has just really stuck with me. It said, if you only know your New Testament, you don't know your New Testament. I like that. As an Old Testament scholar, I like that. Okay, this is Leviticus chapter 4. Leviticus chapter 4. It's kind of a lengthy reading, but it's important that we read it all. We're going to start in verse 1. Leviticus chapter 4. It says, And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, saying, If anyone sins unintentionally in any of the Lord's commandments about things not to be done, and does any one of them, if it is the anointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on the people, then he shall offer the sin for the sin that he has committed, a bull from the herd without blemish to the Lord for a sin offering. Okay, we're going to see about 3 or 4 levels here. Level number 1 is a priest, right? This is the anointed priest. If he sins unintentionally, he has to offer what? A bull. He shall bring the bull, is verse 4, he shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, lay his hand on the head of the bull, and kill the bull before the Lord. And the anointed priest shall take some of the blood of the bull and bring it into the tent of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle part of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense before the Lord, that is, in the tent of meeting. And all the rest of the blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Verse 8. And all the fat of the bull of the sin offering he shall remove from it, the fat covering the entrails and the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver that he shall remove with the kidneys, just as there are taken from the ox of the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offerings. So, what are we burning on the altar of the burnt offerings? We're offering the entrails and the fat around them, especially the kidneys. Now, I don't know if any of y'all have a medical knowledge, but if you have fat, excess fat around your kidneys, it's not a good thing, right? So to get excess fat around your kidneys, you have to force feed these animals. It doesn't happen accidentally. That's my point. Okay? Verse 11, but the skin of the bull and all its flesh with its head, its legs, entrails, and its dung, all the rest of the bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place, to the ash heap, and he shall burn it up on a fire of wood. On the ash heap it shall be burned. Okay, that's level number 1. This is all for the priest. Everybody with me? So the priest has to offer a bull, he has to offer its fat, and he has to sprinkle the blood around the veil. Everybody with me? Good. Level number 2, verse 13. If the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they do one of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not be done, and they realize their guilt when the sin in which they have committed becomes known, the assembly shall offer a bull from the herd for a sin offering and bring it to the front of the tent of meeting. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord, and the bull shall be killed before the Lord. One difference so far between the priest and the whole assembly. Who lays their hands on the head of the bull? It's the elders, right? Not the priest, it's the elders. Then the anointed priest shall take some of the blood of the bull in the tent of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood, sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil. Same as what we saw before. He shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar. I'm going to skip all this because it's the same as what we saw before. Let's see. Verse 20 says, Thus he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull of the sin offering, so he shall do with this. And the priest shall make atonement for them, and they shall be forgiven. That's key. The priest makes atonement for them, and they shall be forgiven. And he shall carry the bull outside the camp, burn it up, as he burned the first bull, is a sin offering for the assembly. So, level number 1 is the priest, offers a bull and the fat. Level number 2 is the whole assembly, all of Israel, we might say. He has to offer a bull and the fat. Level number 3, verse 22. When a leader sins, so a leader, does anyone's Bible say something different than a leader, like the head of a household or something like that? Everybody says leader? Okay, that's fine. When a leader sins, doing unintentionally what any one of all the things that is commanded of the Lord his God ought not be done, and realizes guilt, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring his offering a what? A goat. A male without blemish, and shall lay his hand on the head of the goat, and kill it in the place where they killed the burnt offering before the Lord. It's a sin offering. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour the rest of the blood at the base of the altar of the burnt offering. Now, we can get so quick in reading this that we miss the differences. With the priest, he has to take blood and put it in front of the veil. With the whole assembly, he has to put it in front of the veil. With the goat, he does not. He only has to put the blood around the horns, or on the horns of the altar. All its fat he shall burn on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of peace offerings. So the priest shall make atonement for him and his sin, and he shall be forgiven. So with the whole congregation of Israel, the bull is offered to make atonement for sin. With the goat is offered to make atonement for sin. The difference is, one is for the whole of Israel and for a priest. The other is for an individual, the leader, the head of a household. Okay? This is going to blow your minds when we get back to Luke 15. Now, verse 27 says, if any one of the common people sins unintentionally, in doing any one of the things that the Lord's commandments ought not be done, and realizes his guilt, or the sin in which he is committed is made known to him, he shall bring for his offering a what? A goat. A female without blemish. Not a male, a female. So we're going down the list in hierarchy, right? We start with the priest, then we go to the whole congregation, then we have the head of a household, and then we have any one of the common people. So this could be a slave, this could be a woman, this could be a teenager, whatever. Not a head of a household. Okay, female goat. For his sin which he has committed. Lay the hand on the head of the sin offering. Kill the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. And the priest shall take some of the blood with his fingers, put on the horns of the altar. It's all basically the same. Verse 31, and all its fat he shall remove, as the fat is removed from the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn it on the altar for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven. All right. 4 levels. We have the priest, all of Israel, a head of a household, or a leader, a clan leader, we might say something like that, and any one of the common people. So let's go back to Luke 15. And I did not mark it, so give me just a second. What was killed for the younger son? The fatted calf. Not just the calf, the fatted calf. That fatted calf was there for the purpose of a sin offering. The older brother has a complaint to his father. And he says, what? You never gave me a young goat. Now, is this a male goat or a female goat? The easy answer is we don't know. In Greek, it's the masculine gender for the word goat. We might presume that this is a male goat because the masculine gender is used. However, in Greek, the masculine gender is the inclusive gender. So you might have heard me say this before. The way I talk about inclusive masculine gender is to say, in this room, we are all members of mankind. Right? Well, we have beautiful ladies in this room, and so does that mean that you're not part of mankind? No. Man is the inclusive term, right? Okay. So, goat here is in the masculine in Greek. So what does that mean? Let's say that this is referring to a male goat. The male goat in Leviticus 4 was used for the leader of a household. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because the younger brother comes to his father and says, give me my inheritance. Right? You're as good as dead to me. Give me my inheritance so I can go do whatever I want. The father gives the inheritance to them. Who's next in line to be the head of the household after the father dies? It's the older son, right? It's not the younger son. It's the older son. And so if we're talking here in sacrificial or let's say atonement language, the complaint of the older son is kind of fair. Right? Now, I'm not saying his attitude is right, but the complaint's kind of fair. Like, look, I need the atonement too. Right? I need a sacrifice for me. But here's the difference. The fatted calf was given and a party ensued. Right? A celebration. Communal event. The goat and the complaint of the older brother is limited celebration. Right? See this in verse 29? It says, look, these many years I've served you. I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. Not the full communal celebration for whosoever will who's coming to the party. Because, I mean, if you kill a goat and you're going to eat it, it's not going to feed a huge crowd. So it makes perfect sense that he would say this. But his mind is set on, I've done everything right, therefore I should be a recipient of even the least of the gifts and have my own little celebration among my own little people. That's how Christians think today. I have salvation, so let me have my own little celebration among my own people. And we miss the missional aspect of going into all the world. Of seeing people not as a prodigal son, not as someone who's eating what the pigs eat and who's lying with the pigs, but as someone created in the image of God, worthy of the gospel. We are the older brother in this story. 9 times out of 10, if we hear this story, we try to identify with either the father or the younger son. We are the older brother. We are the one who says, give me the sacrifice for me. Not for the other people, not for the whole assembly. Right? So, if we take the Leviticus 4 method and we parallel it to the animals in Luke 15, The fatted calf has to be killed for a priest or for the whole congregation of Israel. You say, but the prodigal son, that's just one person. Yeah, but what does that one person represent? He represents the whole of Israel, doesn't he? Not just the religious elite, the whole of Israel. So, a parable, we've talked about this before, can allow us to see different characters and different elements in different ways simultaneously. It's a beautiful thing with parables. So let's ask the question then, what does the younger son represent? The younger son, very clearly, the surface level reading, he represents the tax collectors and the sinners that Jesus is eating with, right? Those who are rejected. He also represents the whole of Israel, all those who would receive the blessing through the Messiah. Who does the Father represent? Well, the Father represents God, right? The God who sees the lost one come home and rejoices, and we see that. But who gives of the fatted calf? The Father does. Who makes the sacrifice for the fat bull in Leviticus 4? It's the priest, right? And so here, God Himself is depicted as the priest who makes the atonement of killing the fatted calf for the one who is lost. So, who then does the fatted calf represent? It's Jesus. Jesus is the sacrifice. He is the perfect sacrifice. Hebrews 10, He's a sacrifice. The blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin. Right? And so you have the Father, the priest, sacrificing the fatted calf, making the offering, ensuing in celebration. I don't believe we read this in Leviticus 4, but when a sin offering occurs, what happens to the meat? We saw what happened to the entrails and to the fat and to the hide and the skeleton and all that. That was burned outside the camp in a clean place. What happens to the meat? That's right. The Levites and the priest get that meat. So there's a communal aspect. There's the table fellowship that comes. And by the way, this was the point I needed to make, sorry. The one who made the offering eats with the priests. So what happens with the prodigal son? He eats with the family. He eats with those who are celebrating. Now verse 30 is heartbreaking. Because he says, when this son of yours came, not when my brother came, when this son of yours came. Parents, we've all done it. Our kid makes us mad and we go to our spouse and we say, you'll never believe what your child did. Well, you know what happens when we do that? We're disowning the relationship. That's what the older brother does. When this son of yours came, who devoured your property with prostitutes. Now, when we read about the adventures, let's call it, of the younger son, we never read that he went to the brothel. We never read that he engaged with prostitutes. And the father presumed that he was dead. So, did he engage with prostitutes? We don't know. The text doesn't tell us. So there's one of two ways of looking at this. One is that this is a justified accusation. He went around engaging with prostitutes. Like, why would you bring him back in? The other is that this is not a justified accusation, and the older brother is just piling on accusations when he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Both of those happen in the church. Right? Both of those happen where people come in and maybe we look down our nose at them. God help us. Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner, when we do this. And we look down our nose at them. We kind of know their history, and we assume things about them. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter if he had. Let me ask you a very serious question. And don't hear what I'm not saying, but let me ask you a serious question. Does baptism into the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ and being added to the church, the body of Christ, and having your sins forgiven, does baptism forgive all sins? Because if it does, let's stop being the older brother. It doesn't matter if he was out with prostitutes. It doesn't matter if he devoured your property. He's back. He's accepted. The sacrifice has been given. He's in the family again. Now, verse 31 is perhaps the most beautiful part of the entire parable, even more so than the father running to his son. Verse 31 says, "Son, you are always with me. All that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." Notice that the father does not dismiss the concerns of the older son. He says, look, you're always with me. That's the ultimate complaint of the son. The complaint isn't really about the younger brother. The complaint is, I've been here all the time. I've been working my tail off for you, and I'm not seeing any reward from this. And the father says, you've been with me. All that's mine is yours. Now let's go back to the beginning of the parable when the father split up the inheritance. Splitting up the inheritance is only monetary. He didn't split up the land. He didn't split up the livestock or the possession. It was monetary. So what was the older son going to inherit? It was more than the money, right? He was going to be the head of the household, the recipient of the goat. The Pharisees are upset because Jesus is having table fellowship with tax collectors and sinners. And this parable reminds the Pharisees, yes, you're still righteous. Just because these others are being brought into the group doesn't mean that you're kicked out. That's kind of how we feel about it sometimes, isn't it? We think, well, I've done all that I can do, and well, all that's mine is yours. Now, verse 32 says, it was fitting to celebrate and be glad. It seems from that language almost as if the father is saying, if we had two options, this is the one that we must go with. So maybe we have two options. Option number one is we reject the prodigal. We send him away. We say, you know, you're dead to me, go off and live your own life. Good luck to you. Option two is to have the party and celebrate. Now, let's just take the facts as they are. Okay, let's pretend like we haven't done any of this other exegetical study and heard this sermon a million times. Let's just take the facts as they are from the parable. What would be the expected response of the father? The expected response would be just that. Go away. You're dead to me. You've offended me. I'm cutting you off. You're done. What is the response of the father? Come in, robe, ring, shoes, fatted calf, celebration, back in the family. Of all the biblical doctrines that we struggle with today, I am convinced the love of God is the least understood. Now, is God a God of wrath? Yes. 2 Thessalonians 1, 7 and 8, when Jesus returns, God's going to pour out wrath on those who don't know God and don't obey the gospel. But there are those of us who are so afraid at the judgment of our older brothers that the thing keeping us between us and the celebration is the judgment of somebody else. And our souls are on the line. And those of us who have that judgment, we are going to have to stand before the throne of God one day and explain why our attitude kept someone from the love of God. This is a very serious parable. and it's one that is the most famous parable, and it's the most famous because it shows us every part of us. Thanks for listening to today's lesson. Visit drjoshuahouston.com to check out books, articles, and other helpful resources.